React to Question's video about save. I'll react to Question's video. Hold on. All right, let's react to this one. You guys ready? How Overwatch 2 fixed its biggest flaws in Season 9. Let's see this.
What if I told you we haven't been playing Overwatch 2? We've been playing Overwatch 1, but just without its necessary evils that is the second tank. To have a balanced game, you need to sometimes slow the pace of the game down in order for the fast parts to not get out of hand. Not just for Overwatch, but for any game, there's such a thing as too fast. Like a roller coaster with its turns. Yeah. Sure.
The second tank was definitely Overwatch's biggest issue. 100%. Definitely was not the support heroes that overrode every gameplay loop that players spent years learning that let the original cast be viable, make the big combos that made Overwatch special, and be fun.
If you go in a straight line, you'll go the fastest, but without any turns or loops, is it really all that fun? On paper, wanting less resistance to do what you actually want to do sounds good, but is it really Overwatch? What we're gonna be playing in Season 9 is pretty much the—
And ironically, the biggest resistance to doing what you wanted to do in Overwatch 1 was never the second tank, it was the immortality abilities on support that overrode the gameplay loop cooldowns, and this has been universally accepted by every pro player out there, just in case that was not clear. Aside from Jake.
that has the chance of standing
I love Jake, but he also said that you couldn't kill tanks in Overwatch 1, which, yeah.
on its own two legs. You peek for a fifth of a second, and blammo, you're dead. Within the span of 10 seconds, one character could entirely team wipe, and that's been the main experience of what we've had since Season 1 in higher ranks. Now, it's because of standing on its own two legs. You peek of, is it really Overwatch? What we're gonna be playing in Season 9 is pretty much the first version of Overwatch 2 that has the chance of standing on its own two legs. You peek for a fifth of a second, and blammo, you're dead. Within the span of 10 seconds, one character could entirely team wipe, and that's been the main experience of what we've had since Season 1 in higher ranks. Now, it's because of this insanely high tempo where an entire team fight happens in the span of 10 seconds that there's just no room for team play or teamwork.
What game was he, what is he talking about? What? Fights in Season 7 were lasting longer than Double Shield. That's like, that couldn't be more wrong. What? The only times that team fights were going quickly were like in the betas before the support passive became a thing. And then like Sustain got so strong that the one-shot characters got picked a ton in Season 2. That's just completely wrong. And also like the elims per 10 stat would back that up too, where like the amount of damage you do per elim in Overwatch 2, at least previous to this patch, was significantly higher in Overwatch 2 than Overwatch 1 was in all ranks. So like that was, just to be clear, like Overwatch 2 started going downhill when the opposite happened, when the fast team fights weren't happening and the sustain got super insane that the fights would drag on forever.
Hanzo can just spam one arrow across the map, Widow can just click a single button, Sojourn can just zoop, and
also Hanzo's crit rate was significantly lower than Widowmaker's, and he only was really strong in the brawl. Like he sometimes filled into poke comps, but that again is either map design or sustaining the game being too big or too good rather, which is the same reason he was picked in Double Shield constantly, because sustain was so strong. He was the only character that had a chance to really kill it outside of like the brawl Double Shield meta.
Kiriko is just a miniature Hanzo in the support category. It's black and white. Either someone is dead or someone lives. One person always has a clear advantage. If you want help, the interaction is already over before you're done asking for help. So how did we get to this? Well, difficulty is being used as an excuse. Let me explain. As much as I would love to stand behind it, skill expression is not an excuse for a single group of 5 elite status heroes to be overwhelmingly dominant in top 500, but then at the same time completely terrible for 90% of the rest of the player base that isn't top 500. That's how we get buffs to quote-unquote dominant heroes like Sojourn in Season 8's mid-season patch.
Well, it's almost like the devs, instead of reducing the rail, which is what made her so good at the ceiling and bad at the floor, it's almost like they increased the spread, which made it worse for low-ranked players and didn't do anything to the high-ranked players because the high-ranked players were holding the rail the entire time. That is hero design problems. That's not like a hitbox problem, or like this patch doesn't solve that. Like what solves that is adjusting the character properly. Like Widowmaker will always be good at high level play and be bad at low level play, and like you can't accommodate hero design for player skill. Like, the reality is Ana is going to have a negative win rate in bronze. Widow is going to have a negative win rate in bronze. Like, there's no amount of, like, that's not an issue that you have to fix in the game from a game design perspective. That's how FPS games and a game like Overwatch should be organically, right? So, and these happened because these buffs to these characters happened because in order for one tank to compete for one spot in 5v5, if it's not as powerful as the Flavor of the Month tank or has like stronger options, it just will never get picked because there's no way for it to organically flow in the game at all ranks. That's a new problem that Overwatch 2 had that this patch is not going to solve. So again, that's a 5v5 issue, and Overwatch 2 certainly did not fix that with Season 9, as you're going to start to see the gap between the bad heroes and the great heroes is going to be even wider than it was previously on this patch. And you guys are going to find that out here in about a week, and my take on that's going to come true. Because again, that doesn't, this doesn't solve the issues created by the format. It just makes the game feel better for little newbies.
Prominent heroes like Sojourn in Season 8's mid-season patch, where everyone was left scratching their heads at Sojourn getting a buff to have a minimum rail charge of 25 charge, even though she makes up an overwhelming majority of the top 500 leaderboards. Sojourn is my favorite example of this being the case, but it definitely applies to way more heroes like Kiriko, Genji, Sombra, Tracer, Widowmaker, Hanzo. You get the point. They're all really cool.
What applies to Genji? Genji's been horrible forever. No. What?
Heroes in their own right, but this creates the scenario where high-rank Overwatch is a completely different game from low-rank Overwatch. An entire...
Yes. Do you want to know why? Because the skill for high-level players is completely different from the skill from low-level players. There's no possible way from a game design perspective to make a noob have this be as good as the same options as a good player. That's like basketball trying to say, yeah, Sam needs to find a way to be as good as Steph Curry. How can we change the rules to make that happen? You can't, and you shouldn't. That's not a healthy game. You can't design that out of the game. That's how it should be. That means you have a healthy game. Now, you want more options at the high-level play, and Overwatch 2 limits those options even more because the strength of character and counter-swapping is more important in this game. And Season 9 didn't solve that. So if the claim in this video is that Overwatch 2 fixed the biggest flaws it created, it definitely didn't. Because it actually extended them, because the good heroes are going to be even better than the bad heroes on this patch than previously. And I'm not saying this patch is I'm not trying to say this patch is the worst patch in Overwatch history. I'm not trying to say that here. Like, the art of this patch is great in that, you know, it made people come back and play the game because, like, everybody wants to come out and try these fucking wacky hitboxes, right? But maintaining the players is the science of the game. That's my wheelhouse. I'm not art, I'm science. I talk about this all the time, right? And Overwatch generally attracts the more artistic side of the player base of FPS players. But yeah, no, it's like the claim could not be more ridiculous to say that, oh, the same hero should be viable in every rank. No, they shouldn't. No, they shouldn't. That's impossible to do. And it's, yeah, no.
Entirely different group of heroes against you and heroes with you. If you want to get to top 500, you really only have a chance to be high rank if you grinded on those heroes. The game in high rank becomes about just...
Completely wrong. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. That's not true. Now, more heroes can be more rewarding, right, if you are more mechanically skilled, and that's how they're designed, right? But the idea that you could only play these characters to get to top 500 is completely wrong. If you are a good player and you deserve to be in top 500, you will get there on that rank. Should it be harder to get to top 500 on Moira than Ana or Kiriko or BAP? Yes, it should be. But it definitely is not impossible. Definitely is not impossible.
Staying alive and not about what happens when you're alive. Anyone that enjoys this version of the game,
let me hear what he said.
If you grinded on those heroes, the game in high rank becomes about just staying alive and not about what happens when you're alive. Anyone that enjoys this version of the game plays the game. Anyone that doesn't enjoy it has no other choice. So they stop. So what?
That's always been Overwatch, though. Overwatch has always been a game about minimizing your mistakes. Dying is the worst possible thing you can do in this game. This is what I do to, like, coach up players all the time. Like, this was true in Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2. But why does it feel more oppressive when you make a mistake in Overwatch 2? You want to know why? Because again, in 5v5, losing a player in 5v5 is more detrimental to the fight than it was in 6v6 because you had that extra cushion, that extra player to fall on. Now, was it still a big downside in 6v6? Absolutely, right? But to say that, like, again, this new patch fixes that, it doesn't, because the same thing is still happening. Because again, when it feels like you're dying and the game is all of a sudden unwinnable and there's more snowballs, that was caused by 5v5. That wasn't caused by some balance patch, right? So if the claim again is that, hey, like, this patch fixes Overwatch 2's biggest flaws, and you're citing that as the flaw, this patch doesn't actually solve that, right? Like, you could, like, and some people like the games being more snowbally when you make these decisions. I'm not trying to argue which one is better here. I'm just pointing out that that's not actually true.
What's so clever about Season 9? Well,
the rank system is good.
Patch re-adds the lost breaks that taking out a tank slot did, in the form of added health. Everyone's health got increased, which means the time to kill increased as well. It's been increased enough that coordinating with your team to get that needed pick is worth it. But of course, the most obvious concern is that healing already is insane. No one would ever die. That's where the DPS passive comes in. Damage dealers now have a new 20% heal reduction passive, sort of like a very weak anti-nade. For a large part of Overwatch 2,
it's not weak, by the way. It's insanely OP. And roll passives were still a bad idea. And also, like, again, we'll let him finish.
There's been a massive struggle with independence for tanks and supports because of how high tempo the game becomes without any breaks. So supports kept getting more.
It's not that. Hold on, let's listen to that again. This is kind of important. He is right about this. Hold on.
Now have a new 20% heal reduction passive, sort of like a very weak anti-nade. For a large part of Overwatch 2, there's been a massive struggle with independence for tanks and supports because of how high tempo the game becomes without any breaks.
No, it's not that there's breaks, okay? The struggle between power, between the roles, is because in 6v6 and 2v2 specifically, you had 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports. The distribution between the roles were even, right? Now when there's only 1 tank, that tank has to get half of the power of that individual tank, right? Of the tank that was removed, and the supports got the other half of that power, right? Generally speaking. Now, instead of having like an even surface, 2 in one roll, 2 in one roll, 2 in one roll, to try to figure out how to make sure the power distributions between each of the roles are the same, it is significantly harder for the developers to actually balance out the roles to where they are equal in power level. Now, when a role gets strong, it seems like it comes at the expense of another one. For example, they finally made DPS the best role, one of the best roles in the game again. It's definitely not the weakest because of the passive. However, because of this format, it now feels like that power comes at the cost of half of the support heroes, because some of these heroes were affected more by it than others. Also, when you talk about breaks in the fight, like, the reason why tanking felt so shitty is because you get hit with everything. And even now, the problem with tank, it feels like you just get rock, paper, scissors out of your role, and this happens at the skill floor. That's the big complaint, right? The developers claimed at the start of Overwatch 2 that the big perk to 5v5 PvP is that you could actually play what you want. We've gotten rid of hard counters. But what actually happened is that hard countering became even more oppressive at all ranks. And the reason for that was the matchups that you're favored in, because you got more stats in the matchups that favor you, right? It was easier to overwhelm the pick that was the wrong pick against you. But what happened this patch? That tank that has the favorable matchup, they both have more health, meaning it's even more essential to pick the right matchup. And now the heroes like Hog and Malga and even Doomfist that can't deny any damage from the DPS passive are all going to struggle a lot more, because their heroes, have these weak points that will make it so that it's much harder for them to get picked when they're all competing for one slot as tank. Those were the problems that Overwatch 2 created that Overwatch 1 didn't have. And this patch almost makes those things worse. And you saw Cloudy talking about how Reinhardt is unplayable on this patch. A hero that even has that shield, right? So, like, it's the problems were never like the breaks in the fights or anything like this that Overwatch 2 created, right? The big problems are the counter swapping, right? And now things, I will grant, are killable, which is a good solution. They finally found the way to make things killable, but the problem wasn't the healing. It's never been healing itself. It's either been AoE healing abilities that don't have mechanical requirements, or immortalities that automatically are a brick wall that you run into even if you make the correct play, which end up punishing you for making the right play, which is why things felt like they were lasting forever and things ended up going into burst damage way more rather than dive comps and things like that, because you can just pick Brig Bap Double Shield in Overwatch 1 and deny those altogether. And every pro player who's made these videos, like Iron, like myself, like Hawk, have debunked any claim that claims that tank synergies were the most oppressive thing in Overwatch 1 have been completely debunked. Objectively. It's not really a conversation. More triple support comps were run than triple tank comps, right? It's just what happened. And you can go back and look at the history books, right? And even then, when we went into double shield, a lot of those characters were still busted OP, and sustain created the same kind of problem that Goats did with Dap and Brig. Now, there was that one double shield meta, sure. But to claim that these specific things are what Overwatch 2's biggest problems are is not actually what people were saying.
So supports kept getting more and more tools to handle themselves in the form of damage. Tanks and supports started getting supports because of how high tempo the game becomes production passive. Sort of like a very weak anti-nade. For a large part of Overwatch 2, there's been a massive struggle with independence for tanks and supports because of how high tempo the game becomes without any breaks.
Because of counterpicking.
So supports kept getting more and more tools to handle themselves in the form of damage. No. Tanks and supports started cutting into the mark.
The damage was never the problem. The problem was the sustainabilities. that was the problem. The problem was not Kiriko's damage. It's the fact that she can get out for free and take the duel. Alari's pylon auto-healed everybody while she was doing more damage in the DPS, and she didn't have to actually heal.
Market share of damage dealers, which left damage dealers without their own unique interaction in a team fight unless they just burst damage their eliminations.
Which is because of the sustain. Supports and tanks have always, since the inception of the game, been able to do damage. Zarya had some of the highest damage per 10 stats in the game. Diva, you could output a tremendous amount of damage on. Reinhardt, you could add pretty good damage on. Sigma could do a ton of damage. Winston could do a ton of damage. Zenyatta could do a ton of damage. You could run DPS Ana. Moiras were able to output more damage per 10 a lot of the time than some of the DPS heroes in their game, right? Damage itself has never been the issue. What made Overwatch a great game was that all of these heroes could do damage, right? Everybody could win versus each other, and that was beautiful, and that still is what made Overwatch fucking awesome as a game to play, is that everyone could make the plays. What's the difference between the damage heroes and the support heroes? The damage heroes couldn't get out for free. The damage heroes didn't have override abilities to doing damage and denial from damage. That was always the problem. It was the risk to reward for what these heroes get it for. The idea that DPS lost its identity because supports and tanks could do damage is not true. They always could do those forms of damages, right? DPS lost its identity because the supports passively overrode the value they could get by out-healing it or denying it with immos. Brig is the only hero that denied DPS value by out-healing it because she could duel and heal at the same time. Ana had to make that distinct decision. And my video talking about how supports broke Overwatch really breaks it down in a better way.
The closest we have to a unique value as damage dealers would be Sombra's Hack, Mei's Wall, or Hanzo's Sonic Arrow. Supports heal, but also burst damage their eliminations. The closest we have to a unique value as damage dealers would be Sombra's Hack, Mei's Wall, or Hanzo's Sonic Arrow.
Genji Deflect, Junkrat Mine, Pharaoh Rocket, Echo Stickies. Every DPS hero has a unique identity in the way it can do damage. Widow's Sniper, right? Cass's Flashbang, Tracer's Pulse Pistols and Blinks. Like, every single DPS hero had unique ways to get value. What changed were the supports and tanks that were so over-kitted with abilities and sustain that doing those things for majority of these characters didn't get any value. This is just not right. It's just not right.
Supports heal, but also do damage. Tanks tank, but also do damage. Damage dealers, well, they do damage, and that's it. So the 20% heal.
So when damage dealers only do damage, and abilities get added that override and completely deny damage whatsoever, that's what made the role lose its identity. Is that the other roles just overrode what it did constantly. Every new support had something that did that. So, yeah.
Heal debuff is essentially 2 birds with 1 stone. Damage dealers as a whole have a specific purpose to be called by their teammates for. They have their own identity, as well as it being a way to tackle when supports just spam healing on someone to tank through damage, which would be a problem with the health buff. But this doesn't change the status of the high-ranked heroes. There's been no bridging the gap between the elite tier status and common folk tier status heroes. Would you believe it? The gap between the elite tier status and common...
Having Genji in elite tier status just lets you know that this Pharah also had her times where she was good. But yeah, no.
Common folk tier status heroes. Would you believe it? They tackled that too, because if health is bigger and it's already impossible to hit enough shots to kill someone consistently as is for so many people on heroes like Sojourn or Kiriko, just average it out. And sure, that sounds scary, but when an infinite skill ceiling gets used as an excuse for a hero to be overwhelmingly dominant, it becomes an issue. And that goes for any mechanic in any game, not just Overwatch.
Yeah.
Sojourn is a really good hero, but just not for a game like Overwatch 2. The skill floor is too high for an overwhelming majority of players, and the skill ceiling is too dominant for high-ranked players. Unless something is done to...
For Sojourn, not for every character. Like, again, if they had just done a better job of adjusting Sojourn in Season 2, it wouldn't really be a problem. They did the wrong thing. Like we said on the Group Up podcast a year ago. The problem with Sojourn is that they needed to tighten the spread and reduce the ceiling, which is her rail, one shot. That's what the good players hit all the time. They didn't do that. So that's a Sojourn specific problem. That's not like a net game problem. That's a balance issue.
Bring the whole skill curve to a better average, heroes like that are objectively unhealthy for the game in the long term and extremely unfun to play with or against in the short term. Solution, big bullet. Everyone gets an easier time to hit their shots. See, did you know the amount of...
See, ironically, they could have done that specifically to Sojourn with her spread and reduced her ceiling and it would have been fine. Instead of doing it to the whole game. I'm not necessarily against them trying to do that. I think the values they did it to were a little too extreme and definitely had some outliers, but like, I'm open to that change. It was just way too big out of the gate, but that's what they wanted to do to attract the new players. That's kind of like the art of marketing, if you will. And I wouldn't be as against it if they actually showed the willingness to fix the science better. They never they literally never fix the game's issues though. They just kind of leave them there and say, all right, what's next? Art, right? So yeah.
Hero does is balance around how often a hero misses their shots, not how many they hit. A Widowmaker is concerned to hit their shots. See, did you know the amount of damage a hero does is balanced around how often a hero misses their shots, not how many they hit. A Widowmaker is considered balanced because you hit only 50% of your shots.
If a hero's damage was based on the amount of shots it hits, why does Widowmaker headshot with a fall off range that doesn't really matter do more damage than Hanzo's headshot when Hanzo's crit rate is a third of what Widow's is at high level play? Why was Cassidy's crit lower than both of those characters, even though he's been bad in the brawl? He's more of a brawl character, sure, but his crit rate's also lower. This is just not, like, that's just not accurate, like, at all.
But if you hit 100% of your shots, she'd be nonsense. So by letting every hero, including the dominant heroes, hit more shot, it paints a better picture and it allows them to actually be nerfed properly without it affecting different ranks differently.
Okay, that's no. Balance? No. Oh my God. That is just complete and utter nonsense. I'm not gonna lie, guys. Questron's a great guy, but he has no fucking idea what he's talking about. No fucking idea what he's talking about. Like, that might be one of the worst takes I've ever seen. That's crazy. The idea, oh my goodness. I don't even know what to say to that. I already answered that earlier. That's not...
Every hero, including the dominant heroes, hit more shot. It paints a better picture and it allows them to actually be nerfed properly without it affecting different ranks differently.
Define, okay, first of all, define nerf properly. Like, there's a lot of, like, this is what the Overwatch community does a lot, is they'll throw out a bunch of bullshit terms, right? And not actually define specifically what they mean. And this is what I challenged Flats and Frito and SVB on the Group Up podcast where we talked about like 5v5, a lot of these things, where everybody says, oh, the game needs to be balanced better. Okay, how? Give me a specific plan of action about how this helps the game get balanced better per hero and how projectile sizes allow them to balance the game easier. And there is never an answer. There is never an answer because there is no answer. That's the reality. It's a lot of beating around the bush with an inability to tackle the core fundamental issue itself. Also, the idea that you can never, no matter what you do, have balance changes affect GM the same way that you affect bronze. It's impossible. And if you try to do it, you're wrong, because you shouldn't try to do it, because there's two factors that go into how much value you get from the game. There's hero strength and the hero skill delta, right? And then there's player skill delta, right? Where these things multiply together determine how much value you get, right? No matter the hero multiplier, right? The output you're going to get is going to be different based on player skill. There is no possible way to make your changes affect a bronze player the same way they affect a GM player. And you shouldn't, because that's not what makes a game beautiful. You want the player skill to be what actually creates the impact, right? That's what you want, because it gives the players agency. So just like the idea, like, please don't ever listen. If anybody tells you that you should like try to make the balance the same for GMs and bronzes, like they couldn't be more wrong. Please don't take that seriously, because it's a ludicrous statement. It's a ludicrous statement.
It's actually a pretty clever way to make the entire game healthier in the long run. Look, Overwatch has had it rough for a while, but I really do think that this time around, we might actually be heading in the right direction. So I say let's give it a chance. But for now, thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to watch some of my other stuff too, because that's what the YouTube algorithm thinks is good for the channel. Okay, bye now.
This is the most TikTok Zoomer inaccurate cope video I've ever seen. Listen, if there were some good point, listen, there absolutely are some good points about this patch making Overwatch more approachable for players. 100%. There's definitely arguments to be made. This video just did not hit on any of them. This was just completely wrong. It's great editing. It's great video production. Unfortunately, the substance behind it is just nonsense. Define Overwatch 2's biggest flaws to start. Okay, the counter swapping. They claimed you'd be able to not be hard counted, and they were completely wrong. What would you guys say? Like, some of the sustain got too good for a while. Well, they didn't nerf the immortality abilities. They just nerfed healing in general, which is going to disproportionately affect the supports and throw the balance out of whack. Like, and now the DPS passive, and I say this as a DPS player, is way too strong. I don't like role passives at all. I don't think they need to be in the game. It's another variable that the devs have to try to balance, right? So how is it easier for the devs to balance the game when they keep adding dozens of variables to make the game's balance go out of whack that will affect different characters differently, when they couldn't balance the game when it was a format that was more favorable for them to balance? So the argument, if you're trying to argue that balance is going to be better because of this, no, it's not. Because you've just reshuffled the board the same way you did coming into Overwatch 2 without taking a step back and trying to see how you can fix the format that you're in. The reality is 5v5, like, these problems that were created by 5v5 can only be solved by leaving 5v5. So if you want to talk about direct hero interactions in the 1v1, like, that can be addressed within this format, and they can do a better job of doing that. But like, if you're talking about trying to solve counter swapping, that can't be solved via balance, because that's a format issue, right? And this patch doesn't do any of that. What this patch does is it's just aim assist, right? It basically just says, hey, if you couldn't hit shots in Overwatch, you can come on and have fun hitting shots, right? It's a cool, wacky little temporary short-term fix, right? This doesn't fix anything in the long term. In fact, it actually makes the long term of the game worse, because it just means that they're going to continue to reshuffle the board instead of like actually sitting down and balancing the format. And again, it's just more so a question of like what Overwatch's model is going to be. I'm not trying to sit here and doomsday this either, by the way. That's not my intent. A part of some of these new heroes are really, really fun and different, and that's fine, right? But the idea that this saved Overwatch's balance is just completely wrong. It just reshuffled the board, and actually what it did is it made the stronger heroes even stronger in this patch, and the weaker heroes even weaker in this patch. So especially in the tank role. Which was the biggest loser in Overwatch 2. The tanking problem has gotten bigger and bigger, and there's a lot less fun for tank players. Now, I will say, heroes like D.Va have found a good spot in this patch. And there are, like, they rotated the characters in and out, which just might be the new Overwatch 2 meta. But to say that this patch that this Season 9 solved that is wrong. I wish he would have hit on the rank system instead of like the actual balance, because if he had talked about the rank system, it would have been way more valid of a video, because the rank system actually is way better and there is way more incentive to play regardless of the state of the game. That was a great thing that might save Overwatch and might get people playing competitive way more. They brought stacking back, which allows players to play with their friends. I think if he had hit on those subjects about the social aspects of Overwatch getting a lot better, it would have been a great video, but making good points. Unfortunately, he really only focused on game balance and was completely wrong about most of it. So yeah, well-edited video. Question's a great editor. I just wish he was as right as he was passionate and talented at editing when it comes to this specific take. But yeah, no, good editing, good video. Just not accurate at all. I'm not trying to cook him. It's just not right. It is what it is.